On this seventh day, we are renewed by the resurrection. And so we open ourselves to receive. The Gospel of John, in the scene of the burial of Jesus, says, "In the place where he had been crucified there was a garden, and in it a new tomb in which no one had ever been buried. Since it was the eve of the Jewish feast and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there." It is precisely in this garden that the risen one meets Mary Magdalene. According to Genesis, the Lord God planted a garden in Eden eastward and placed there a man whom he had fashioned to keep it and cultivate it. Easter is the first day of the new creation, the beginning of the new light and the new time. We enter into the final reality, even though it is still dark and the night is not yet over. We draw near to Mary Magdalene. We see Mary Magdalene on the morning of the first day of the week, entering the upper room and excitedly announcing, "I have seen the Lord." She spoke of seeing because she had lived for a long time in darkness and chaos, but with Jesus she had come to the light. She followed Jesus, contemplated his signs, admired his authority, listened to his words, and was moved by the tenderness with which he touched wounds and healed ailments. At first, Mary was not able to go further, and her eyes, still dim, only allowed her to see what many others saw in Jesus: a prophet, a sage, a healer, a good and compassionate man, only a small part of the splendor that radiated from his presence. Mary stumbled after Jesus because she knew that where he was, she lived, just as a plant needs sun and rain to exist. Mary stood beside Jesus at the foot of the cross, in the midst of pain, contradiction, and failure, and saw the extent of his trust in the Father who gathered Jesus up at the end of the night. At dawn on Easter Day, Mary met Jesus in the garden. Jesus spoke Mary's name and confided to her the good news of his resurrection. And from then on, Mary lived only to announce to his brothers what her eyes had seen, and to pronounce the name of the one who, by loving to the end, had definitively conquered death. And we contemplate Jesus, who said to his own, "You will all stumble, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am set on my feet," raised up, "I will precede you into Galilee." That's in Mark 14. Jesus announces this to his disciples as an inevitable journey and promises them that he will go before them. But first, he will be mortally wounded. His path will lead to life, and they will recover, in a new way, the relational bond that unites them. The same people who will stumble and be scattered will walk together again, regrouped and preceded by Jesus on his journey toward Galilee. In a culture where walking distances is the norm, the issue of precedence is important when traveling in a group. It is the position of the leader, of the one who has taken the initiative, who leads the way, who also assumes the place of greatest risk, and who is responsible for defending those behind. When they were going up to Jerusalem, Jesus went ahead of his disciples who followed him in amazement. All those who followed him were afraid, Mark tells us in chapter 10. The scene gives us a glimpse of the enormous distance that separates the one who goes ahead from those who follow him. In the accounts of the resurrection, the same relational game reappears. Jesus waits for Mary Magdalene in the garden, and through the women, he sends this announcement to his disciples. Go and tell his disciples and Peter that he will go before them to Galilee. There they will see him as he told them. Matthew 28. According to the scene of the fishing on the lake, the disciples have arrived alone, but at dawn, John recognizes that it is Jesus who is waiting on the shore, and that he has fulfilled his promise. Jesus has arrived before them and is waiting for them in Galilee. And how shall we receive our new name today? We name the empty tombs that we sometimes haunt, the lifeless places where we waste our life. We hear our names spoken by the living one. Jesus alone knows it and has the power to connect us to the deep current of vitality and freedom that lies hidden deep within us. In calling Jesus Master, we recognize the bonds of discipleship that unite us to him, and we choose this way of putting ourselves in the position of having something in common with him. We ask Jesus for the gift of entering into that affinity that Madeline Sophie calls union and conformity, in order to live in passionate coherence with Jesus' preference for the little ones and the least. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, we hear in John 20, we become aware of what is still dark in our lives, of the dark aspects that make us recognize ourselves in fear of the disciples, in the discouragement of those on the road to Emmaus, in the unbelief of Thomas. We silently open ourselves to welcome the one who can flood our darkness with his marvelous light. In John 20 we hear, "Go and tell my brothers, I am ascending to my Father and to your Father, to my God and your God." we receive this proclamation as addressed personally to each of us. It offers us the joy of knowing that the Father is a shared possession between the risen Lord and each one of us. We recognize ourselves as sisters of Jesus, belonging to this new family in which we exchange meaningful words and life-giving relationships. It is time to turn everyday scenes into sisterly encounters. We search our language for words spoken with love, expressions that have generated life and hope in us. We evoke the memory of sisterly details exchanged among us, words of encouragement, time spent listening to and caring for each other, friendship with people with whom we share this mission, the joy of the simplest people, times spent celebrating life. In all this, we discover signs of the resurrection. We look for the words of encouragement that the Spirit of God has for us today. I am creating something new. I will give you a new name. Be courageous and confident. Come with me. Let go. Go out. Dare. Breathe. Trust. Love. We open ourselves to those refrains that urge us to witness the joy of the risen one. We become aware of how much we need to hear words of encouragement that put the emphasis on the positive and not so much on what is lacking, more on what goes well and less on remembering the failures to be corrected. The garden transfigures our wounds and makes them luminous, like those of the risen one. At the empty tomb, we learn that there are birth pangs and that the grain of wheat, when it falls on the ground and dies, bears much fruit. You are more than those wounds that inhabit you, we hear. Suffering and death do not have the last word over you. If we keep these words in the memory of our hearts, we can pass through the night with the confidence of one who awaits the coming of the compassionate one, the one who will wipe away the tears from all faces. We remember Madeleine Sophie, who, in April of 1865, was 85 years old and had only a month to live. She died on the 25th of May of that same year. In a letter to a nephew of hers, she told him that Paris was having a splendid spring, and she hoped there would not be a late frost because that would spoil all the flowers. At the beginning of May, she enjoyed the fine weather and spent some mornings in the garden. Sitting under the cedar, her favorite tree, she would wait for the little girls to come out during recess to be with her. She was waiting for the meeting with the one she loved so much and who was soon to call her by name. Let us write on our heart the new name we received today. Today, we celebrate what we have experienced by the lake. A celebration by the lake can be held around the 21st chapter of St. John. The room can be in semi-darkness with bread and wine on a table, the Paschal candle lit, and as many extinguished candles as there are participants. Let us listen to some of the texts. At sea and at night, Jesus appeared again to the disciples by the lake of Tiberias. He appeared to them as follows: Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and other disciples were together. The names of those taking part may be added. And Simon Peter said to them, to you, I am going fishing. And they said to him, let us go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. We share the experiences of darkness, night, and sterile work. We also evoke situations of the dark night of our world. Let us share those. On the shore, there was a presence. Jesus was already on the beach in the morning, but the disciples did not recognize that it was Jesus. He said to them, do you have anything to eat, lads? They answered, no. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. They cast it and could not drag it because of the abundance of fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. When Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had nothing else on, and jumped into the water. We share now our moments of abundance that we have experienced in the exercises, in the retreat. How and when we have recognized Jesus during these days, and what response we want to give him. Situations of light and hope in the world made possible by the risen Lord are also shared now. The candles in the Paschal candle are lit, and the room is illuminated. And there is a shared meal. When they came ashore, they saw some coals prepared, and there were fish and bread on them. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have caught. And Peter came dragging ashore the net full of large fish, 153. Though there were so many of them, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have lunch. None of the disciples dared ask him who he was, for they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took bread and gave it to them, and the fish. This was the third appearance of the risen Jesus to his disciples. We share the bread and wine on the table in a festive atmosphere and end by praying this prayer together. When we paddle in the dark in the middle of the night and our nets are empty, you are present, although our eyes do not know how to recognize you. Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. In the early morning, when light overcomes darkness on the first day of the week, you are on the shore, and your word illuminates our shadows. Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Lord of life in abundance, Lord of full nets, like John, we want to be able to recognize your presence. Like Peter, we want to jump out of the boat to meet you. Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. You give us bread and fish to eat. You have prepared for us, and in that shared meal, we learn to hand over unreservedly what we have freely received from you. Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. You claim from us the confession of our love, and then send us to sustain, to support, to defend the lives of our brothers and sisters. We don't have more than a little bread and the poverty of our love, but that's what we can offer you. And with that, we are ready to follow you. Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. With all those who believe without having seen, with those who seek without faltering, with all the small and humble of heart, we believe and proclaim that in you death has been conquered, that you are alive and you precede us on the way. Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you.